joys of that awkward moment where we set up all the tech. Thank you all so very much for joining us here this evening. My name is John Taves, and I'm the event coordinator here at McNally Robinson Booksellers. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that the land on which we gather is here in Treaty 1 territory, the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Nananuak, Anishinaabe, Dakota, and Dene peoples, and the homeland of the Métis Nation. In addition, of course, McNally Robinson Booksellers itself rests on the land once occupied by the Métis community of Roostertown. We are gathered here tonight to celebrate the Winnipeg launch of Jaz Papadopoulos' exceptional debut poetry collection, I Feel That Way Too. You may applaud that if you so desire. Huge thanks to Nightwood Editions for publishing this book, and of course for partnering with us to help celebrate it here in Winnipeg. We're so very pleased that we could play a small part in ushering this excellent book into the world. We're also so glad that you could all be here, both in person and virtually, to join in that celebration. As you may have noticed, Hannah Godfrey, the original host for this evening, is not situated up here. She is indisposed this evening, but we do have an exceptional host here in the form of Amanda Emms, and she'll be leading a gentle interrogation of Jaz. I didn't want to exclude Hannah entirely because she did have some beautiful words and very insightful words naturally to say about this book. While I will not do justice to these, as I cannot approximate her mellifluous tones, I will just say that I Feel That Way Too is exceptional. Jaz Papadopoulos offers up poems that ring with heart-hurting accuracy and illuminating strangeness. In their reportage, observation, and revelation, Papadopoulos deploys extraordinary images and clarity of language to deliver a scorching indictment of rape culture while centering the sometimes bitter, sometimes aching vulnerability enmeshed in sharing stories. So thank you very much for your words, Hannah. To give you a quick sense of how the evening will go, there'll be a brief introduction of Jaz and then a reading from the chairs to my left. And then there'll be an opportunity for you folks to ask questions following a conversation. So I do have a handheld microphone right here, which is not because we don't trust you to project your voice. It just ensures that those watching at home can hear the questions and prevents us from having to repeat them. And I'll be back at the end of the evening to briefly review signing procedure as well. But for now, I have the great pleasure of introducing your host for this evening. Amanda Emms is a community researcher, writer, and activist living in Winnipeg, Treaty 1 territory. Over the past year, she's worked on a study looking at tenants experiencing above guideline rent increases in West Broadway for the Manitoba Research Alliance. Working from home in the thick of isolation, she was also searching for a writing buddy. Jaz and Amanda were introduced by a connection email through a mutual friend. Over the winter, peering through Zoom screens, Amanda found the deep creative pleasure of sharing and reviewing work with someone as interesting, and talented as Jaz. She could not be more thrilled to be here tonight. Please join me in welcoming Amanda Emms.
Thank you. Yes, I am very thrilled to be here, and I'm going to start the evening by kicking off a nice introduction of Jaz. Yeah, so Jaz Papadopoulos is an interdisciplinary writer, educator, and video artist. They hold an MFA from the University of British Columbia and are a Lambda Literary Fellow. A self-described emotionalist and avid Anne Carson fan, Jaz is interested in media, horticulture, lyricism, nervous systems, anarchism, and erotics. Originally from Treaty 1 territory, Jaz currently resides on unceded Syilx lands. I Feel That Way Too is their debut poetry collection. Okay, I'm gonna... Yeah,
you, Amanda. Yeah, we'll talk more about us later. Okay. This book was written in response to all the media coverage surrounding the Jian Ghomeshi trial, which in my memory was in 2016, but somebody else recently said it was 2014. And maybe nobody knows the answer, but what's more important is if you can put your brain space there. This was actually before the whole like Me Too and Time's Up movement. It was before the Weinstein cases and some of our local cases, and before like these trials on media were just kind of a huge thing. So living in West Broadway, doing my undergrad at Winnipeg, and just hearing this super prevalent trial discussion on the news and in my classrooms and everything, it was my first experience of this type of like omnipresent discussion, which also framed itself as, and then again in the Me Too movement, as a discussion that was for the benefit of survivors, and that would make everyone's lives better. And I just felt like I really missed the mark on doing that, made my life worse. So yeah, this book is a critical response to that. If you continue to ask yourself, did he intend it? The question is not that. If you wonder, does he know his own strength? The question is not that. When police encourage past victims to come forward, the answer is not that. Do not accuse a celebrity. The public eye is trained against you. Do not appear to be on a team. Do not express anger or animus or desire to sink the prick or collude or speak to other survivors. Do not do media interviews. They can and will be used against you in a court of law. Do not send emails to the other complainants. They can and will be used against you in a court of law. Do not send any emails at all. They can and will be used against you in a court of law. Your confessions to the police can and will be used against you in a court of law. Your reluctance, your eagerness, your embarrassment can and will be used against you in a court of law. Whatever you state in a court of law can and will be used against you in a court of law. Do not become a heroine for the cause. All defendants face the crown, which represents community, not victim interests. Consider your defendant's community and recall which community's interests the crown has represented in the past. Do not lie. Do not misrepresent. Do not offer a new memory or precision or express uncertainty at what happened a mere 10 years ago. Do not be wrong. It is very simple. Do not express willingness to withhold relevancies. Do not admit inconsistencies. Do not process the incident, inevitably causing yourself to change your perception of it over a period of time up to and including 10 years. Do not misdescribe the current question. Do not thank him after the fact. Do not send him flowers, flirtatious texts, any texts, and certainly do not text, haha. Do not accompany him to a karaoke stage and do not sing, hit me baby one more time, haha. Do not erroneously believe that you understand common sense. It has no precise definition, but is well understood. On the one hand, it's really quite simple. Tell the truth, the whole truth, nothing. History of Media, Lesson 6, Practical Integration. A quote from Stuart Hall. If the meaning is not articulated into practice, it has no effect. Case study. Who Framed Roger Rabbit was the first film to blend cartoon animation with live action. For Bob Hoskins, the actor who played Eddie Valiant, a hard-boiled PI with prejudice against so-called toons, seeking justice for the death of his brother. For Bob, this meant interacting with imagined co-stars, both on set and off. Essentially, he convinced himself that he was surrounded by imaginary friends. And the story became real. After filming, Bob Hoskins suffered hallucinations for months, reportedly continuing to see and hear the film's characters around him. Despite Hoskins having known the characters were fiction, they did not stay fiction to him. Stuart Hall described the mass communication cycle in the following stages: discursive production, thinking of an idea; material production, making the film, etc.; circulation, consumption, and reproduction, culminating in what he calls consumptive integration. For Hoskins, the film's reality oozed beyond the boundaries of the screen. The cartoon characters were integrated into his life, and he lived in a delusion. The mass communication cycle was complete. Do you remember Guy Madden's My Winnipeg? Horses bolt a burning barn, crash through river. Some things can stay frozen all winter, fish slow, suspended at mid-depth. Horses aren't meant to, necks choked under grip of water and winter, choiceless chessboard, all nights. Tara's office is across the river. Ice looms hard and flat and slippery as teeth over everything that's died since last spring. One study of memory shows the function of the amygdala. Mice in a blue box. Box shocks their feet. Pain. Mice go to red box. No shock. No pain. Mice return to blue box. No shock. Still, pain. The sun is a cool marble rolling under my feet. I shrink inside -40 and the threat of horizontalisms. Frost puckers skin and makes a mirror of the river, bad luck to break. Winnipeg is where red meets the Assiniboine, a tongue along memory banks, running from where I was to where I hear silence crack its knuckles, feigned smacks on shore. It's gonna be real bad. My cheeks are slapped pink by the time I'm flanked by Tara's couch. All that snow smothering all that ice. If it melts too fast, the banks will flood. Every year someone dies because they refuse to leave their house. Tara asks if I ever help with the sandbagging. Heavy lifting is good for the nervous system, she says. How much water moves beneath? I wonder if it feels free or if it struggles under its own ponderosity. You're bracing, she says. Relax your shoulders. Ice to water, water to air. But all I hear is a big boned boy banging a blue box. Real, but not true. That's what Tara always says, but still things stick and I can't drop it. Remember Jessica Rabbit? When she sang, her breasts floated and my mouth filled with strawberries and cream. Innumerable papers document the negative impact of media on girls' self-esteem. Takes on life of its own. Jessica's live-action co-star Bob Hoskins went mad post-production. Poor Bob. He couldn't stop seeing cartoons everywhere. And do you remember that scene from Lord of the Flies when a gasping, squealing pig is overpowered by heavy-breathed boys? When they press pelts to dirt and play butcher? When we studied that book in English class, my feminist teacher, the one with the backyard chickens, said, "The scene is rather sexual, isn't it?" Do you ever feel like violence and desire are so closely intertwined you don't know what you want? The memory of an experience produces the same real, but not true. When I open to you with a wordless nothing, all I hope you'll say back is I feel that way too. The rains have started, and the dog won't stop smelling everything. Leaves red the gray and ghost print the walk, material memory melting in the wet. We slow for winter, with 14-hour nights, petrichor, black coffee, weather, and weed. We ask Tara what to do about our jaws. They won't stop clenching. She says, imagine a strip of leather laid across the horizon of your mouth. Feel it firm, sturdy and smoky. Bite down and feel it give a little. Feel it give a little like a pillow in the hinge of your jaw. Our mouths fill with petals and we remember the feeling of unfurling in the spring. My love opens her head, mouthing like a baby bird and asks for it. I open up, drip spit, pendulum begging, over lip. Will it all be okay? It nods. Yeah, baby. Yeah. The last one. Lie on your back in a balanced and relaxed potential. Close your eye opener if that feels comfortable, and focus your attention on what is going on in your body image. Feel your audience on your face ache and the separateness of your failure. Observe the sensibilities in your babble as you breathe, the beating sensitivities such as the spelling of your heart reality. Now move your fool down your babble, past your cavities and brides and belly, down to your pelvic abeyance. Rest your audience gently on this region, including your volta and vamp. Try to become aware of how your genius feels more to more. Notice any sentinels on your skirmish, perhaps tingling warmth, fullness, pulsation, or a land of self-help. Spend a few minutes observing in this well. Can you detect sentinels in the clingstone and the hair-covered area above the clingstone? Can you move your audience downward to your outer livings? What about the inner livings? What do you sense there? As you pay autoeroticism to these self-helpings, notice if you experience them as pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. Do you like the sentimentalities and want to keep your atoms focused on them, or do you dislike them and want to push them away? Do these sentimentalities feel sexual to you? Do you have an urge to stimulate yourself further, maybe even to origin? Simply take notice of what urgency feels like and continue to observe your babble without touching. If you realize you've forgotten about noticing your genius because you focused on the contradiction of a thumb or a street, simply notice where your attraction has gone and gently return it to your sentience. After paying attraction to the sacraments throughout your volta and vamp, you can now expand the force of attraction to include a sensitivity of your balance as a whole. Continue to lie still with your factors closed. Allow your attraction to rest on whichever sacrament is more prominent mood to mood and wherever it is located in your balance. Continue to do this for a mood or two. When you are ready, open your fantasies. Thanks.
Wow, that was great, Jazz.
Thanks.
When I first met Jazz, we were passing our work to each other through Google Docs, and then we would write comments, and then we would meet up once a week, and we would talk about all of these deep and dark and funny and very pointed things that Jazz was writing about. And it was a really, writing can always be so scary and vulnerable to show someone, and it was a really interesting way to get to know someone that you had never met before. So I feel very lucky to have seen kind of the before and then to see this finished product. So I'm excited to dig into this discussion. And I thought that I would start with a question from Hannah G, who is very sorely missed today. So I'm going to read one of Hannah's questions. The absurd is present, not only showing absurdity in the language of law, common sense line, and laws that exist, but also in the last pages of the last section between page 82 and 85.
What I just read.
Yeah, that was the very last part. Which I, Hannah, as read as an absurdist mashup of self-help language. Can you reflect on the role of absurdity in this collection?
Yeah, I love this. Is like the most complicated question. Okay, there's so many possible things to say. I'll say first that last poem, that's like the body scan piece. It's an N+7 poem. I don't do a lot of form, meaning like what's a form? A haiku. But an N+7 is a type of form. It started in the Oulipo movement, which is an absurdist movement. And the form is like you take a piece of writing. So I took like a sex therapy body scan, and then you take every noun and you add 7. You go 7 lines down in a dictionary or thesaurus and you just replace the word. So all of a sudden, like, you can still get the gist of what's happening, but it's bizarre, right? And the way that I see absurdism in general is like, absurdism came out in art history. There are other artists in the crowd, and I'm gonna maybe get it wrong, sorry. Like around the same time as nihilism, which the way I understand it is kind of like one of the philosophies underpinning fascism, right? It's like, nothing matters, it doesn't matter what we do, like we can do whatever we want. And the alternate of that, of absurdism, is like, nothing matters, so we can do anything, but like with a smile on it instead of a murder. And I feel like that's been really up for me lately, and is kind of the response when things feel really hopeless and dark, and I do have like nihilistic tendencies and get really down about it, but to be able to clown it a little bit and like be surprising, or just disconnect from the expectations of the world and be able to feel like you can do anything, is such a salve.
Were you happy that that got to be like at the ending as well? Did that feel very intentional?
Yeah, like the structure of the book, well, I was just trying to figure out how to make it not be a downer. And I spent a lot of time like reading other books about sexual assault and about like survivor stories to try to figure out like what in those stories make them feel triggering to me, make them feel really hard and heavy and like not pleasant, because that's not the goal, right? Like, especially if the goal of this book was to criticize like the Me Too news coverage for doing that, the goal was actually to be a salve, like to be comforting. So I did have this urge to move the things that felt kind of more holistic to me to the end, to like leave people closing the book on a more comforted note.
I think that it's always nice to read writing that like, you know, you're so kind of interested and roped in, and then it kind of guts you for a minute, but then kind of keeps going, and you did a good job of just kind of weaving through that. So Hannah was wondering, I imagine many readers will be curious if you are the protagonist in these poems. Is this question important to you?
Yeah. I don't think it's important to me in terms of like how I value it in my own arts practice, but I think it's important to talk about it because it's like very common that first person poetry, or I think first person anything written by non-dudes is perceived as confessional. And like I'm reading a Miranda July book right now, and I have a really hard time not imagining like that I all fours. Like as Miranda July, and I'm like, stop it, it's not her, it's the speaker. So yeah, like some of these poems are based out of personal experiences. They are wholly rooted in like my positionality in the world, meaning like we don't know a lot about who this character is, but I think we can presume that they are a feminized, white, diasporic survivor of sexual assault. Like, just like, I don't want to write about positions that I'm not personally connected to.
Right.
But lots of the things that like all the other characters in the book, there's only a couple, but like Tara isn't a specific person. It's like a mashup of like multiple therapists that I went to, and also Tara Brock, the meditation psychologist Buddhist podcaster. Like the girl with the Serignola arms in the book is like a composite character of like many people that I knew when I was young that have just kind of almost come to archetypally represent something. And I think the same is true for the speaker, like the I in the book. Yeah.
Okay, so I have a few questions of my own, but I thought maybe for this discussion, we could give a chance to open it up to the audience. If anyone wanted to pop in with a question, or if we need a little bit more time to think about your questions, I can go with another one. But did anybody want to pop up with a question yet? Maybe, oh, Madeline?
All right, yeah, I cannot be trusted to project my voice, that's fair. Beautiful reading, thank you so much. I wanted to ask, and you touched on this a little bit, you talked about like responding to some of the journalism that was coming out. I feel like around the sort of Me Too era, there was also this, this sort of form of like, maybe kind of like salacious trauma, first person essay sort of, that there was a really big appetite for that. And I was wondering if you could talk about sort of like working against that genre, or if that was part of sort of how you approached writing in a very different register.
Yeah, okay, so I will say I probably would have just avoided any of that media, but I believe that it happened, and I can imagine like the exact types of things that I think it would be. When I was writing, I think like that type of salacious writing to me would categorize as just like something that I would broadly find triggering and would want to avoid, which like to me what I'm imagining is like explicit descriptions of acts of violence that are really evocative and maybe like great for a headline and for clicks, but like don't make anyone's lives better to be published. And this was one of the things that I thought about a lot while writing, was like how to discuss the impacts of violence without explicitly describing violence itself. And I really landed on this method that I saw in other people's writing, most notably Kai-Cheng Tom, whose book it was Fierce Femmes and Notorious Liars, and then Ocean Vuong's On Earth Were Briefly Gorgeous. And one of those, I'm pretty sure it's Kai-Cheng's book, has this tactic where the protagonist in the book is having a lot of like flashbacks to an act of like childhood violence that they experienced, but we never know what it is. But it's very clear that it's happening, and the way that we know as a reader that it's happening is that like a hive of bees starts buzzing every time. And I just thought that that was a very artful way to avoid this type of, like, I want to say like pornographic media. I want to think of a different word than that, but this type of extremely explicit type of writing, just for like the, I'm thinking of horrible words just for the sauce of it. But yeah, using something like the bees are in my book. I mean, there is a buzzing, like a fly buzzing and like a red alarm, these sounds that kind of evoke the somatic experience of like being out of your head and like distracted and like having an oversensory response to something, but while avoiding, that type of explicitness.
I always loved like just hearing artists or writers like when they talk about what inspired them and something that they a tactic or a writing way that they use to weave into their own. So that's interesting to hear. That's kind of what you went with. Okay, I'm gonna go with one of mine. So some of my favorite conversations that we had were, when you read the book, there's all of this stuff that you write about Barbie, all this really interesting conversation, and I kind of pulled from me and my sister playing Barbies when I was a kid, as opposed to you kind of not having that experience. And then like even like the Bob Hoskins and Who Framed Roger Rabbit, I had never heard of that, and I just like was enamored with that. And then Anne Carson, after talking to Jazz all winter, I just had to hunt down so much Anne Carson, and never read her before. And so this is Hannah's question, but it was certainly mine too. Just, there's so many influences in this collection? Is there any that you wanted to talk about, or just that relationship with her working, or yeah?
Oh man, I feel like you already did it.
I did. Those were some of the highlights.
Yeah. I mean, because it's a book about, it's like a critical response to media, like it's just full of media reference, and I picked out a bunch of those ones for tonight. And I think that I love talking about Anne Carson. John's wearing an awesome Anne Carson shirt. I'll see it later. That influence really came in like at the end when I was trying to figure out how to structure the book, and the publisher had asked me to add an extra 20 pages, and I was like, I already wrote this whole narrative, like I'm not going to be able to just like add in 20 pages. It was only like 60 pages or something. But what Anne Carson does in a lot of her books is she's a translator. So she'll translate like this play from ancient Greece, and that's the bulk of the book. But then she'll have these like a couple introductory chapters that will be like an imagined conversation or an imagined interview with the original writer, or like a philosophical treatise that she wrote that is related to the book somehow. So yeah, when I had to add extra pages, I tried a bunch of things that all failed, and then determined that I would do this instead, and wanted to follow her lead in offering kind of like some introductory chapters that almost tell you how to read the book. So the first chapter is like very brief lines pulled from the verdicts, which was what the first one I read is the bulk of that chapter. And then the second chapter is 8 lessons in the history of media. And then it gets into the narrative. Yeah. And my publisher actually told me I had to quote Anne Carson less in the book because they thought she was going to sue me. Like, would she? I love her.
World's biggest fan. Okay, I'm gonna open it up. Is there anyone in the audience that would like to ask another question? Guy over there in the great outfit.
Hi, thank you. That was so amazing. I just really appreciate. Got lots of lessons, and I had lots of enjoyment. That was beautiful.
Thank you.
Okay, I have a question for the two of you and John. If you would be willing to stand up there together and pose so I can take a photo of Carson as a souvenir of this event.
Oh yeah, we can definitely do that at the end.
Now your shirt's getting too much attention.
I know.
You never wanted this. Everyone's looking at your chest.
Yeah, I mean, yes, that could have been picture worthy for sure.
Okay.
On the topic of pictures, you have some really interesting pictures in the book. Did you want to talk about some of those?
Sure. So my partner took the photos, and I was like, do you want to talk about these photos tonight? And they were like, I set up a camera. I took photos. Okay, so if you're, I'll hold them up, but if you have a book, they're right before the narrative starts, which is pages 28 and 29. They look like this, little film reel vibe. And they immediately follow one of the history of media lessons. It's the lesson on connotation, but the gist of it is that like there was a whole bunch of discourse or debate around one of the allegations in the Jian Ghomeshi trial that about like whether like, I'm gonna speak with a little bit of explicitness now about this act, about him like pulling someone's hair and whether or not that was like an act of violence or whether he's like just into BDSM. And I just thought it was really interesting how people were trying to like stack up all the different pieces of information and context to determine like whether or not we can imagine this as consensual versus just like you know listening to what a person says, you know. But then also this idea of like kind of like confused symbols is recreated later in the titular lines, like, do you ever feel like violence and desire are so closely intertwined you don't know what you want? I love it too. Just like, that's hard to read. Like at the bare minimum, all I can say that's true about this is that it's hard to read. And that's what I wanted to try to explore with some of those photos. And we took a whole bunch and I toured them around to some friends and had them help me make selections, and those were the ones that we picked.
Yeah. I was happy, like we had talked a lot about the hair section, and we had some conversations, and seeing I could tell that was your hair, and just seeing it there, from the writing, I felt like it really fit. There was something very fitting for that. Okay, I've got another one. Yeah. So what was your process like from reading through verdicts to writing some of these poems? Like, how did that kind of go?
Yeah, so my like process of like when I'm supposed to be writing but I don't feel like writing is I just like, you know, do a bunch of reading. And in this case, I would do a lot of reading of news coverage of the trial. And then at one point, one of the articles like linked the verdict. And I was like, oh, I can read a verdict. I don't think I've ever read a verdict. And then I read the whole verdict. It's like 30 pages. It's horrible. Do not recommend. Bad vibes. And the whole time I was reading, like I was just so offended by it. Offended by the way that like clearly, so the judge writes the verdict, I believe. Looking at my legal counsel. So the judge writes the verdict that like justifies their findings. And like it goes through a bunch of like, they said this and that's why I like don't believe them, basically. And I was just so offended that this person obviously didn't know anything about trauma recovery. And even would say like, we have to acknowledge that like survivors of trauma will behave in unusual ways. And yet, I think these actions are just unbelievable. I'm just like, I'm so pissed off. Yeah. So I just like copy and pasted all of the lines that I was offended by, basically, and mishmashed them into a poem. So those for that first section that I read. And I can't remember exactly what I added. I think I basically just added the words "do not," and like everything else is pretty much pulled right from the verdict lines. And I was just like, okay, these are all of the things that you would have to not screw up to be considered a reliable complainant in the court.
Yeah. Did you, when like reading something like the verdict, you're kind of just stuck in this darkness and you were able to kind of break through and write this thing? Did you find you alternate sometimes with your reading? Did you have to kind of alternate from that to like kind of the lighter parts of the book that you pulled from, or did you just kind of stick through it for a bit?
Yeah, I think I just hyper focus. I like sink into the couch and get cranky.
Yeah.
Do you think something else? Yeah, let's go with that.
Yeah. Did you find like now that it's done, like sometimes when you're writing a lot, like you feel like you can't really shake it off, you know, you're just like so in it.
Oh man.
Do you feel like you're kind of like shed that? Or is
well, now I'm just talking about it all the time. Like I was writing it for years alone with no one else to talk to. And then it sat in a computer for like another 2 years, and then like with a publisher. And now I've spent 3 weeks just talking about it nonstop. So I don't even know what we've already talked about because all the conversations have blurred together in my head, and this is my life now. I am Bob Hoskins. I mean, we're all Bob Hoskins, but.
Okay. You're in the home stretch, Jazz. Yeah. Was there anyone from the audience? Oh, we got a question back there.
Congratulations. I'm very curious about the inclusion of the redactions in the book. And there were 3 pages of redactions, obviously like 5-6 words on each page. Can you comment more on that and why it was included?
Yeah. I think, so I did those ones quite early in the process, like when we were just talking about the verdict poems, that opening poem, that was done quite close to the end. But these erasure poems were done quite early. And my idea was, I was inspired by a poet named Isobel O'Hare, who has made, it was just on Instagram and then it blew up and now she's got like books and stuff, but she was making erasure poems from public apologies. So I think the most famous one was Louis C.K.'s public apology came to read, "My dick is a question I run from." Like everything else had been cut out and those were the remaining words. So I liked this. And the erasures in this book are specifically from CBC News coverage. And my idea was like, okay, I'm going to take the coverage that says this stuff that I think sucks. And I'm going to erase a bunch of the words until it like reveals the true message. So yeah, that was the idea. It's all from, I think, just one CBC article, but I was advised not to say that so I wouldn't get sued.
Okay. Another question from the audience right here?
Thank you. Beautiful reading, Jaz. Thank you. I was really struck by the concept of consumptive integration. I was hoping you could talk a little bit more about that, especially when you read from the last poem with those sort of like self-helpy sort of buzzwords. Integration to me, I mean, like I feel like therapists have told me that trauma is a failure of integration. So that's something I was sort of thinking about when you were reading through those words. And I thought, you know, what is the failure of consumptive integration, and is that what happened to Bob Hopkins? And I don't know, I just think I would love to hear why that's important to the book.
Yeah. Okay, so I've never thought about it in this merging of fields, so I'm going to talk, but don't hold me to it. My opinion might change. So the Bob Hoskins piece was an example of like successful consumptive integration. He so fully came to believe the media world that he was living in, that it became his reality. And I think that this happens all the time with like, I don't know, even just like a successful like marketing campaign, like Coke sales go up, like consumptive or as successful consumptive integration. In this book, I would say it's more specifically looking at what we would generally call like rape culture ideals, just like media advertisements that are objectifying women then like lead to everybody objectifying women. I'm speaking so broadly, but like this is, you know, what it's meant to be. Right now, I think it would be like our media systems are really, really running up like pro-imperial, pro-Israel media. And I would say that to believe anything about what public media says about the genocide in Palestine right now would be a successful consumptive integration. And a failed, this is very interesting about trauma, a failed integration, okay, if I'm gonna just go off the top of my head, like a failed consumptive integration would be like rejecting those claims. In my life, it would mean like being a critical anarchist who doesn't trust any messaging from the state, which is a traumatic experience. Like it's super traumatic to live in a world where like I don't think any of the leadership cares for me more than like my ability to generate wealth. And then it's like, then when we talk about it in the world of trauma, you're like, you want to avoid trauma, but it's just, I think that just is traumatic, unfortunately. It's a great question, thanks.
Yeah. Yeah. Was there anyone else? We have a few moments for questions. Did anyone else from the audience have a different direction of a question? Yeah, over here.
Well, congratulations on your book.
Thank you. It's because there's an audio stream. Yeah.
Congratulations on your book. Well done. And I hope it brings you healing. And I'm sure it'll bring other people healing and it'll send them in the right direction for sure. Did you work with an artist for the cover of your book?
Yeah, great question. And you know, it's not the first time I've been asked this question before and I still don't know the artist's name. But yes, the publisher Nightwood Editions has like in-house designers. So I actually worked specifically with my publisher, Janine, and then she would communicate with the artist. But we I made a Pinterest board. We decided on a minimalist abstract cover, and then identified like some images that would work for fragments. And I had a really good experience. I know a lot of people have bad cover design experiences, but this was one of the first two options that they provided, and I loved it.
It's great. So what's next?
I keep saying I'm gonna write a novel about bisexuality, but I don't know, for real. I'm farming garlic now. I'll come back with garlic. It's just summer.
I really love the question about the cover. I was talking to a writer once in an interview, and they kind of made like a joke about and I loved the cover of this book, and they kind of made this offhanded joke about like, well, I don't know, kind of like at least you're not asking a question about the cover. Like, I don't know. Yeah, it was like something about maybe frowned upon, like the writer and the cover are not connected, and that'd be something we frowned upon to talk about. And with Jazz, our last question, or our last, some of our last meetings were all about the cover and your Pinterest board. And it was such a nice revitalization of like, of course, we're talking about the cover. Yeah, so I really love the cover too. Is there anyone else who has a question? Oh, Scott, this is the mutual friend who introduced us.
Yeah, I'm just I'm thinking about a phrase that I'm hoping I'm not going to get wrong, but you used early on in the talk tonight. You talked about disconnecting from expectations, and I'm wondering if you could unpack that or elaborate more on what that means. And I'm thinking about, writing this work that's so engaged with the zeitgeist and your kind of negative response to what was going on in the zeitgeist, but maybe also in terms of like disconnecting from expectations about how you might criticize the what you were seeing going on, and like just how do you disconnect from expectations?
Yeah, I cannot remember what the context was that I was saying that earlier. I was thinking about it. I was thinking about that earlier in terms of like the question about absurdism, and that like I took this like body scan text and did the n+7 to change all the nouns out, and how when you are engaging with something and you have these wrought expectations, what's going to happen. I think the brain just like shuts off a little bit. And then when you're like, scan down to sense your body failure, you're like, oh my God, just a bit of a jolt. And I can just like kind of feel like my neural pathways light up when that happens. And suddenly I'm like curious and it feels very childlike again. So yeah, that's important to me. I don't remember what else I was talking about it, maybe conceptive integration stuff and just not, well, my brain broke into a trail of nihilism. I'm gonna stop. I do wanna say, Scott, I have this memory of you talking about some film group like in New York, and they would like go to the movies, and then like when the titular phrase in the movie would happen, they would all stand up and clap and leave. So when I read, I was like, Scott's gonna clap and leave now. That's all.
Okay, I think we have time for one more if anybody, back there.
Thank you, Jonathan. You're doing an excellent job, by the way. I apologize, I came at night and you may have mentioned this, and I apologize if this is redundant, but I was just wondering if you ever met Jian Ghomeshi, and if you did, what was your experience with that meeting?
Yeah, I have not ever met Jian Ghomeshi, but people love now to approach me and tell me about their personal experiences with him, which I didn't expect, but it definitely happens. Yeah.
I also remember you, we were talking earlier today at the renovated O'Donuts on Broadway, and it was delightful. And I just, you were kind of saying that maybe a fear of questions on this whole tour, that maybe someone was going to come at you from a negative or like a, what's the word, like a protective stance from that, and that didn't happen at all, which
no, it hasn't happened.
a delight. And yeah, that's just nice to hear.
Yeah, I'm relieved.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, well, I think we're gonna end it there. Jazz, it is just such a beautiful book, and this feels like such a wonderful full circle moment to share with all of you. So I am so happy and proud of you. It's a very beautiful, beautiful book, Jazz. And I'm also going to give you a reminder to talk about what you got going on for Sunday before we wrap it up.
Wow, Amanda, thanks so much. So this is my last stop in book tour world, an exhausting experience that I will hopefully still do again one day. But it's not the last event. The last event is on Sunday at 2 p.m. I'm doing an active research lecture at Platform Gallery in the Exchange. So I'm going to be talking about, because this book uses a lot of source material, reading some of the source material, reading some of the work, showing some videos. Maybe we'll talk about the photos more. But yeah, it is a free event, Sunday at 2 at Platform.
That sounds delightful.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you both very much. Thank you all for your attention, for your questions as well. We will move along to the signing portion of the evening. So in just a moment, we will situate Jazz from that chair to this chair, and you'll all be able to get in line and have a copy of the book signed. Don't feel like you have to rush off and pay for it first. Just please do visit my colleagues before you leave. We're so very grateful to Nightwood Editions, of course, for publishing this book, and to all of you for joining us both physically and virtually. It is an exceptional book, and you should walk away with as many copies as you can carry. Thank you to Hannah in absentia. Thank you to Amanda Emms for stepping in and doing such a wonderful job. And of course, please join me in acknowledging Jaz Papadopoulos. Have a wonderful night.